There's a lot of things I want to explore with you, but first I want to close the loop on where we left off last time. So, quick context: we were exploring the agency or the autonomy of a leader of Israel, or how much control Netanyahu actually has in ending the genocide in Gaza, or now maybe even the war in Iran. We spoke about the German Sonderweg theory, which implied that Germany was on a special path after World War One, after the Treaty of Versailles, the political instability, the financial instability, the fall of the Weimar Republic, which implied that Hitler was a consequence or an inevitability of the path Germany was on. And you've argued rightfully that the German people didn't necessarily know or vote for Hitler because of his stance, or because of his anti Semitism, or because of the Holocaust. But they did want someone who was radical or ruthless. And then it's hard to predict how
I
extreme.
don't know if they want someone who is radical and ruthless. Look, first of all, I have to always qualify my statements based on my knowledge.
Right.
I studied the subject very closely between the years 1996 and 2000. I went through all of the available scholarly literature in English on the subject. After my parents passed, and I felt I had a good grasp of the subject, I stopped studying it, which means I have not looked at the scholarship from the last 25 years. I have to be last 20 years. I have to be honest about that. But the record was pretty clear as far as I can tell. It was uncontroversial. Until the Great Depression in 1929, the Nazi Party was getting 5% of the vote, 6% of the vote. With the 29 Depression, it jumped to 18%. And the anti-Semitism in Hitler's campaign was pretty much what a British historian, Ian Kershaw, he called it was an add-on. You added it on, but that's not why people were voting. It's like, if you'll allow me, since we want to be current, it's like with the Mamdani campaign. Yes, he was Muslim, but did anyone care? Yeah, I'm sure some Muslims voted for him because he was Muslim. I'm sure there were some who did. And because he was Indian. He's Muslim, Indian, and also African. He grew up, he was an Indian family in Uganda. So there are a handful of people who voted for him for that reason. Was that the main reason? Of course not. The main reason was his campaign of affordability. That was his campaign slogan. And it was the same thing with Hitler. Hitler promised that he could restore the economy. So there is no evidence that Hitler's anti-Semitism played a critical role in his rise to power. Now, once he got into power, first of all, he very quickly installed a totalitarian state. And the anti-Jewish hysteria was not actively opposed by the Germans. Germans, non-Jewish Germans, they did harbor prejudices, anti-Jewish prejudices. I don't attach great significance to that. You know why? Anybody who's honest with themselves, we all carry around prejudices about all sorts of people. So if the Germans carried around a prejudice, and maybe a little more than a prejudice against Jews, that doesn't shock me. It's when it starts crossing certain thresholds. The most indicative threshold in 1938, a German Jew, I'm not sure if he was German, maybe he wasn't. No, he wasn't German. A Jew named Herschel Greenspan. He killed his family had been deported and dislocated. I can't remember the exact details, but the images were of a family being caught between all these conflicting forces and forced to go here, forced to go there, forced to go there. And he killed a member of the German legation in Paris, I think, if my memory is right. And then Kristallnacht happened. That's when the Nazis, it was called Kristallnacht because Nazi thugs smashed the windows of synagogues and Jewish property in general. The polls showed, because there was public opinion surveys, the Germans did not support it. They were willing. Now, why they didn't support it, it's a mixed picture. Some didn't support it because they thought it was wrong to do that to Jews. Others didn't support it because they thought that civilized nations shouldn't carry on that way, and Germans pride themselves as being the peak of European civilization, which it was in that era. In philosophy, in the arts, and everything, you went to Germany, So the Germans, up until Kristallnacht, which is the eve of World War II, up until then, you can characterize them as harboring prejudices. Not a big deal. Everybody harbors prejudices. Probably a more pronounced prejudice against Jews than other ethnic groups because they were so prominent and vulnerable. They had a double quality of being both prominent and vulnerable as a group. They represented only 1% of German society. There were 60 million Germans and about 60 million Germans, and of those, about 1%, 600,000, were Jews. So they were exposed, what you can call an exposed minority. But the turning point seems to have come in the attitudes towards Jews. Seems to have come during World War II. It was a combination of two factors. One factor, the war was being blamed on what was called the Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. And number two, the war went bad. And now the German soldiers were literally freezing to death in the Russian winter. Freezing to death. Between that and the totalitarian propaganda that this was just a Judeo-Bolshevik war, the German heart hardened. It hardened to the point of stone. That's how I understand what happened in that period.